Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album from HAIM, their sophomore album called Something to Tell You. I'll be the first to admit that I was really hard on HAIM the first time I covered them. Again, I can make the excuse that I was very early in my reviewing career on YouTube back in 2013, and that I probably could have afforded to be a little bit more deft in some of my commentary, but I'm also not going to deny that for all the hype that's been thrown behind this group by a lot of the music press, I've been consistently underwhelmed by the actual music and songwriting that's on display. Which of course is a little bit awkward for me to say because on some level, HAIM is the modern mainstream music critic's dream project to review. Independent and underground earn plenty of the hipster points, but not too weird or unconventional to lose the mainstream public. Hell, they're friends with Taylor Swift, which is such an easy name drop for all that clickbait. They're indebted to folk and indie acts and soft rock acts of the past, but with a very modern style of songwriting that would win over most of the Poptimist crowd. They've had an image that seems a little bit more weighty than your average girl group. They play all their own instruments. They were a little bit more quirky. It's very easy to see why a lot of critics were really taken in. And you know, I wasn't really one of them. And I'm not saying that to brag. I wish I could have found more in their songwriting to like beyond HAIM to really appreciate and get on board the bandwagon. But outside of specific songs like The Wire, which yes, it's awesome, it made my year-end list of the best songs of 2013, bar none, I was just underwhelmed and a little bit unsettled by some of the implications in that songwriting. It just didn't quite resonate with me. But again, your average music critic's dream band, that's what HAIM is. So with all the acclaim, you would expect them to have a follow-up ready pretty quickly to capitalize on that buzz, and now it's 4 years later. I'll give them points for 2 years of touring pretty hard, but apparently initial studio sessions were pretty unfruitful, and it took a lot longer for the band to pull things together, which struck me as kind of odd, given that I never found their arrangements or writing to be incredibly complex or challenging to really assemble. But hey, there's an art in blending styles and nailing the formula so well, even down to a pretty basic pop song. So now that we finally have Something to Tell You, what did we get? Okay, here's the frustrating thing. I'm not going to deny that on some level this project feels more musically and lyrically cohesive, and seems to skirt around the edges of the major underlying issues that I've found on Days Are Gone. But at the same time, it did so by sanding back a lot of the edges of their blended throwback sound into something that feels kind of tepid in the least interesting way possible. Now that's not saying Something to Tell You isn't tolerable or listenable. I can certainly listen to this and generally enjoy it in a background sort of way. But whereas HAIM seemed to have real experimental potential and instrumental chops off their debut that just needed a little bit more fine-tuning in some of the writing, Something to Tell You feels overworked and overproduced and sanitized to the point where any experimentation or real bite or raw presence feels almost perfunctory or accidental. Or let me put it another way. While I can be more forgiving of easy listening or adult contemporary music than most critics, especially around the late 80s and early 90s, especially if they got strong vocal harmonies backing them up, I'm not gonna say that music in that vein can't feel a little dated or sterile or really underwhelming if the writing does not step up to back it up. And thus, when HAIM delivered the equivalent of a mid-90s Donna Lewis record with only the hint of real groove or bite or experimentation, and yet are being marketed as being a lot rootsier than they actually are, with all those Fleetwood Mac comparisons which have even less relevance now. I mean, Case Lang Bears, they could easily run circles around this group, with catchier and more lyrically interesting music to boot, but it can get a little bit exasperating to deal with all that marketing. But again, that's more a problem with the marketing than the actual songs. But upon a number of re-listens, I get the impression that the marketing is doing a lot of the heavy lifting to compensate for compositions and production that just aren't all that interesting or organic. If anything, it feels even overproduced. And I definitely think Ariel Rechtsted deserves some blame for this. Whenever this record seems like it's on the cusp of letting those firmer, richer guitar tones really cut forward, they're supplemented or often overtaken by blocky, or even off-key synthesizers that don't remotely fit in with the rest of the looser grooves, especially when you pair them with vocal harmonies that are never approaching that sort of dissonance to really match them. And that happens all across this record. Moments where the groove and flow or eccentricity of the band feels more forced than coming naturally. The cluttered squeal and effects around Want You Back belong to Little of Your Love, the latter song trying for a squonking bit of doo-wop that HAIM don't really take to all that well, the abrupt switch to a breathy, warping interlude on Nothing's Wrong that utterly kills the momentum of arguably the best hook in song here, the odd, watery hollowness of the title track that seems to be trying to synthesize a Tom Petty song, and let me stress this, those are the songs that I actually like. And that's the other issue. After the title track, this record settles into a very liquid and mid-tempo vibe where every attempt to break free of that feels kind of stilted and awkward. Yes, I was happy we finally got a guitar solo and kept me crying, but between the vocal distortion and the utter lack of driving groove behind that guitar, it feels like it was trying to be more raw than it actually is. Just feels a little bit out of place and honestly goes on a little long. Same case for the closing track, with its rougher, muffled fidelities that can't hide that gloss for entirely too long, or how Right Now tries to really get going in that final minute, but every moment where the groove starts to pick up, it just kind of stalls out. It all just feels so clumsy, with none of the looseness that made HAIM actually appealing to me, especially live, like how the guitars on Ready For You sound so weedy and chintzy, or how hollow You Never Knew feels to supplement its kiss off that makes it by far the least likable song on this record. That's before you get songs like Walking Away that might as well be alternative R&B tracks, and they're not particularly interesting ones at that. And yes, I get that they're trying for a modern synthesis with the adult contemporary music of that time in the 80s and part of the 90s. That's a little bit smoother, I can understand that, but there was material there that at least had some stronger writing, or at the very least performances that reflected greater investment. And maybe it's a factor of Rex Day placing them a little further back than he probably should, but the vocal harmonies and delivery, they always seem a little bit more detached than is probably intended, given a lot of the subject matter at least. Well, so about these lyrics. Okay, I think even HAIM fans will acknowledge that you're gonna go into HAIM more for the vocal harmonies and some of the atmosphere and the retro throwback nature of these songs than what's actually being said on them. But you know what, I will say that HAIM are taking steps in the right direction here. Not so much of a narrative as it is a flow of moods and realizations as they move from wanting to rebuild a relationship that was probably bad news from the very beginning, all through the lack of communication and the mixed messages with this guy and trying to share something more in that deeper love, all to the stark realization that it's probably not gonna work because this guy either cheated or he's got eyes for somebody else and is just need for them to move on. And the line that stands out to me the most on this record is this: you know I love to be in love. That constant craving for affection and closeness that will hook you up with or give second chances to the wrong people. And when some people will highlight how much Lorde embraced very similar ideas on melodrama, there are two problems with that assertion. For one, Lorde seemed a lot more self-aware about the consequences and choices that she's actually making there and the larger implications on society at large, acknowledging her own intensity, whereas HAIM provides lines like, "Was my love too much for you to take?" A song before they play the girls that pick up the calls for all the wrong reasons despite things being very much over. Kind of contradictory there. And for another, while Lorde can actually back up that intensity in her delivery to anchor that melodrama and her more sharply descriptive nature of a lot of her writing, HAIM, they just don't. And it's an issue of both feeling underwritten and a lot of the language being used not all that interesting or descriptive. After all, these are not unfamiliar sentiments, and even in retro soft rock and adult contemporary, HAIM are drawing on this. They at least had some more interesting lyrical turns of phrase than this record does, with barely enough to even imply that there could be deeper metaphors here. And if you're gonna be more simple and direct in the writing, that can work, that can be fine, but you need to compensate elsewhere with more flair or edge or experimentation or personality. And look, I'm sorry, it just doesn't really translate here. And I think that's part of the problem, the translation, because there's a part of me that feels that a lot of this will play much better live than it does on record. Ease back on all the obvious studio gimmicks and focus more on solid enough underlying melodies and hooks, because there are a few of them here. But even on that note, I can't help but feel like Something to Tell You just doesn't have the same spark or flavor as Days Are Gone. Modern quirks around a retro pastiche that wasn't all that interesting 30 years ago anyway. And without much in the writing to really stand out for me, I'm thinking an extremely light 6 out of 10, and only a recommendation if you're curious. It's not better than Days Are Gone, and for me, yeah, it's a bit of a disappointment. But hey, if I'm right, HAIM will at least make this material a little bit more dynamic if they perform it live, so if they're playing a festival near you, probably worth a listen. Check it out if you're curious. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I can imagine this review might be a bit controversial, my last HAIM review was, but beyond that, if you guys want to buy the record, links in the description below, and I got the poll up there for all you to tell me how wrong I am. Beyond that, I've got, if you guys want to get more involved in my scheduling process, link to my Patreon is right over there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once a week you guys get to add records or even movies to my schedule if there is indeed space and you're in the higher tiers. Any more contributions on what I might be able to do to improve my presentation? I'm also all ears. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse. and I'll see you next time.